gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today our guests are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
See you, and our man in Kiev, Ivan Kucherenko, Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, Jonathan. Hello to everyone.
Great to see you, Ivan. Maybe you, as usual, have a clip for us to watch.
Yeah, today is a very remarkable day, October the 14th. It was the day when in 1945 Ukrainian insurgent army actually was created, starting the period of fighting both with the Nazi Germany and with the Soviet Union for the freedom of Ukraine. And that fight was actually it lasted till 1954, where Soviet Union, with all their resources and possibilities, they were not able to stop the fight of Ukrainians for their freedom. I actually tried to find some video explaining what Ukrainian insurgent army was, but unfortunately found only a trailer of a movie. But I think that it will be even better because you and our audience, if you are interested about it, you can find this movie on YouTube and watch it in order to discover more about those heroic Ukrainians of our past and their fight for freedom. But now we can watch a trailer of that movie.
Саме раніше бабуня в нас вставала, каже, вставайте, бо їдуть машини. Їхали німців. І бачимо, вигружаються і цепом пішли.
Нас арештують. Де застали, бо то люди все тікало до лісу. Старі і малі тікали.
Бо це була столиця Бандеровська.
По нашим данным установлено, что в районе Космача сконцентрирована банда УПА.
Поки ми не відкрили вогонь, більшовики не зорієнтувалися, що там хтось їх чекає.
Вони один до другого кажуть, що там, зенітки?
Вони не могли збагнути, розуміти, політики нашого підпілля.
І жіночки варили, і кормили, і плакали, влюблялися. Життя молоде.
Прибиваємо ще, бо ми в оточенні. Прибиваємо ще з команду в одну сторону.
І тоді партизани скочили і забрали цю всю зброю.
Були тут, були. І що вони хотіли?
Свої держави.
Свої держави.
Really good. Yeah, I think we should all find and watch this movie. And even by 1954, when it was all done and over with, there were still a small group that continued resisting Soviet occupation. And they were still around for a long, long time. And,
Gentlemen, do you realize the full importance of this? That most people would not realize, but because of the existence of this Ukrainian insurgent army, and because it was able to carry on for so long, and even in reduced form after 1954, that this was probably one of the main reasons that NATO and Western Europe were safe from a Soviet invasion of NATO of Western Europe, because the Soviets would not have been able to execute a successful invasion of NATO at any level because of the insurgency in Ukraine. And this
Yeah.
basically kept NATO and Western Europe and arguably the world from a potential third world war. That is when you look at it.
I agree with you, Jonathan, and that actually, when you've seen in trailer that Soviet, they didn't consider them as a fighter for freedom. They've named them as gangs. There were some kind of gangs for doing some bad things in the western part of Ukraine, but. Ukrainian insurgent army was actually a mini state because I made a mistake. It was established in 1942 after the Nazi Germany captured Ukraine, and Ukrainians who actually were happy of coming Nazis to Ukraine because they thought that they will be able to make some deal with the Nazis, like President Trump was sure that he will be able to make a deal with Putin. It was unable to make any deals with Nazis because they were completely mad, like Putin is. And when they realized that, they actually decided to fight both Nazis and later Soviet army, and they had their own infrastructure, the printing facilities. They've printed books. Even they had own radio Aphrodita, which broadcasted in different languages, in English language, in French, in German, in Russian, in Ukrainian. And thanks to that radio, the Western countries actually they've realized what's happening inside the Soviet Union, because that radio broadcasted till the early 50s years. So I agree with you, Jonathan. It was a really great case of Ukrainian struggle, and thanks to it, that desire of freedom, actually, modern Ukrainians got it thanks to our ancestors, thanks to the Ukrainian insurgent army, because our nation actually was fighting Russians for more than 100 years, actually, in the modern European history. And now it's third major stage of Ukrainian fight towards Russian for our independence, because the Russian goal in this war, as we've already realized, it's not about capturing some territories in the eastern Ukraine, like occupying the Donetsk region, Lugansk region, whatever. Their main goal is to destroy the Ukrainian independence, to make Ukraine a puppet state like it's Belarus, and to return Ukraine to Russian influence zone, actually.
What's fascinating about this, Ivan, is that as I am confident this will happen, should Ukraine emerge victorious in this war against Russia, that the ripple effect is going to be amazing, because not only will Western Europe ally with Ukraine and help to rebuild it and help economically and thus so forth, the ripple effect on Belarus will also be interesting, because if Russia becomes consumed by its own internal divisions and economic collapse in the wake of this Russian-Ukrainian war, then Belarus may decide that its best interests lie in allying with the West and with Ukraine. And this will have a positive ripple effect in the decades to come. So this, both the history of Ukrainian resistance as well as its potential future offers a great deal of optimism. And as this truth is being conveyed to Western Europe, to the nations to the allies, to members of NATO, as well as to the United States and Trump administration and any succeeding administrations, they're already learning this lesson. They are already agreeing with many of the conclusions that we have been talking about on this program over the past year, really, and arguably before that. that Russian victory is far from inevitable. Indeed, it is becoming increasingly unlikely, and therefore, this is something that we should build upon for not only for current Ukrainian independence, but also for the future stability of Western Europe and arguably for the world, and give President Trump something else to brag about.
I was watching just before the program the Ukrainian Today. It's a Ukrainian program in a Russian language. Why I like it, because they show a lot of pictures. Not only they're talking about current events and so on, but they're also showing the pictures. And what is apparently very clear, that the main powerhouse of supplying Ukraine with weapons and all kind of military assistance is becoming Germany in big steps.
How ironic.
They're doing very little talking. They're not discussing this and so we are going to provide you with so much of this and of that. For so on, they're not talking at all. What they're doing, they're supplying a real first-grade military gear, and they are producing, as a joint ventures with Ukrainians, a lot of weapons on the territory of Germany and on territory in Ukraine. Very often they start production in Germany, and then they move the production from Germany to Ukraine. So in a way, there are two things happen. First of all, Germany doesn't have to buy US weapons. They can produce their own, and it's cheaper and in some cases more efficient. Second of all, nobody can blame that, oh, Ukraine is being supplied by West, it's NATO who is fighting. No, it's not NATO, it's Ukraine with the help of Germans. But once the production is completely moved to Ukraine, then it's becoming Ukrainian production. So all the weapons, which we are going to see even before the end of this year, a lot of new weapons that will be produced on Ukrainian soil by Ukrainian people, by Ukrainian organizations, companies, they will provide first-class ammunition and weapons to fight Russians. I don't understand with Putin and his people, are they blind? Are they deaf? They can't hear or learn anything. They're completely dumb, stupid people. That's most likely what's really happening.
Well, Sasha, all they are doing is proving the truth of what Einstein once said. Only two things are infinite: the universe and human stupidity. And he said he wasn't so sure about the universe. So the Russians are simply demonstrating that truth. And now this is all part of what you have been talking about, is all part of this correlation of forces that the Soviets used to like to talk about. In this case, the correlation of forces continues to move in favor of Ukraine, political, economic, and military.
But Jonathan, you know that it's a Russian saying, what's the biggest problem in Russia? There are two, дураки и дороги, means fools and their road systems, their highways and so whatever else. But you see, the first duraki, stupid people, they are changing. Okay, 10 years ago they were different duraki. Now they're yet different duraki. So it keeps changing. Dorogi, the highways, they don't change. They're the same as they were during Second World War. And when I was visiting Moscow, Moscow friends explained to me why they're not building the new roads. They say, because the roads, that's what saved us from Germans. They couldn't attack us with our roads. So if we will build new roads and highways, so it will be easier for NATO to invade us and go all the way to Moscow. Can you hear?
Yeah. The same reason.
In Ukraine, we have three problems. One problem more than in Russia: fools, roads, and Russia.
Right.
Russia is a big problem. That's true.
Well, fortunately, Russia is inflicted with greater problems than Ukraine has, at least internally. So this is all very, in my view, from my perspective, it is all very positive for Ukraine, and that basically what we and the West in general have to be careful of is that crisis of Russia. Instead of the crisis of capitalism, we're going to have a crisis of Russia internally and politically, where they might be tempted. They remember when I was talking about them projecting, mirror imaging, projecting their own thoughts and intentions onto those of the West. They, in fact, may be tempted, or at some point, whether it's Putin or his successor, he may be tempted to lash out in one last desperate attempt to reverse the situation. Remember that the Germans in World War II, as the Allies were closing in from all sides, that Hitler decided to lash out. In this case, he decided to lash out at the Americans in the Ardennes, in what came to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. Only a very few Americans, military officers on the Allied side, saw it coming. And fortunately, General Patton was alerted and was prepared to move his forces very quickly in response to that. Otherwise, it would have been an even bigger disaster. As it was, the Americans took 70,000 casualties in the Battle of the Bulge. So we have to beware of, I like to say, never take your foot off the neck of a dying cobra. In this case, that cobra, even if it is dying, even if it looks weak, if you leave yourself unprepared, it can still lash out and heavily damage you. So this is what the Ukrainians should be very careful of, and continue to press, continue to drive, but always be wary of that dying cobra.
Yeah, that's true. What's interesting is, of course, we were all following what's happened then between Israel and Hamas, and subsequently there was a document which was signed by 4 leaders, Erdogan, Trump, and the other guys, which I don't remember the names. One is Qatar, a leader of Qatar, and one is Egyptian, Sisi. What's apparently interesting, I read this document which was signed. The document is nothing about nothing. There is absolutely no obligation on any part to do anything. What they are saying is, it's like, remember when Medvedev, when he was a Russian president, he said that the freedom is better than non-freedom. This document is very similar to, there are no obligations on anybody to do anything. Is that we are for everything good against everything bad. That's what this document reads like.
It is. It looks like a diplomatic, full faith document. It's arguments based on nothing but the good faith of the participants.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is, Jonathan, okay, here's for you to answer.
Oh, goody.
Why Trump, who couldn't, whatever he did in the last 2 weeks, why he couldn't do it, say, 2 months ago, 4 months ago, maybe 6 months ago? Why now and not before?
Why now? Because President Trump was in the process of having his mindset and perceptions altered. He had always believed before this that everybody wants a deal. Yeah, he believed he had a great deal of faith, possibly overestimated, quite probably overestimated his own ability to broker a deal in line with his own set of beliefs regarding the art of the deal. So now, but as events proved him incorrect or inaccurate, he realized to himself that he had to adjust his thinking. And so therefore he had to become open. His mind had to become open to alternatives that he was previously not prepared to accept. See, he basically had to admit to himself, maybe I've been wrong about this. I think I need to change my approach. And that's probably...
John, I have a different idea. I have an idea about Israel's bombardment of Qatar, Hamas headquarters. And Qatar, remember, Qatar made a gift to Trump, this Boeing 747, and so on, such a great deal for Trump. And he became furious with Netanyahu, how he could bombard their best friend and the best potential financial asset for Trump. So he became furious and he started to really put Netanyahu down. You cannot do this, you cannot do this, you must do this, and so on. And that started to, mind you, I don't believe that there is a peace in Middle East. There is the release of hostages. This alone cannot be underestimated. This is a great thing out of all things happened so far. This is by far the greatest thing. However, what's happened next, nobody knows. Hamas doesn't lay down their arms. They actually brought in 7,000 new insurgents. So I think the work is well ahead. And who is going to control what's Hamas doing? And all this noise about bringing this Arab peacekeepers from Qatar and wherever else, this is, in my opinion, nothing but noise, because while Hamas doesn't lay down their arms, and they don't, nobody will step there at all. It's only Israeli army who can do it, nobody else.
So what you are describing is that what we have right now is the basis for cautious optimism, very cautious optimism.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's essentially it. Because as Clausewitz once said, in war, the result is never final. And that applies to politics as well, because he considered war to be an extension of politics by other means. In politics, the result is never final. So
Jonathan, if Trump would get infuriated by Putin, and it's more than enough evidence that Putin is completely irritating so far Trump. He is a biggest obstacle on a peace between Ukraine and Russia. It's nothing but Putin himself.
Right. It's becoming increasingly, I agree with you. It's becoming increasingly obvious that Putin is the big sticking point, and that so long as Putin remains fanatically and illogically and irrationally, from our perspective, tied to the conquest of Ukraine, as long as that attitude prevails, then it will be necessary for us to continue the economic pressure against Russia, to solidify Ukraine's ability to resist and to give it increasing freedom of action to resist Russia and to weaken its infrastructure, and just to keep pressing ahead. Persistence, and only persistence is all conquering in this case. So in pressing until Russia loses its ability to effectively prosecute a war. Diplomacy will not settle it.
What is important comparing to the period what we've discussed in the beginning of our show, now Ukrainian is fighting not in the far Ukrainian west, like in Carpathian Mountains, and not fighting the guerrilla war. Now Ukrainian is fighting a full-scale war. Ukraine is defending or the full-scale Russian invasion, and is able to defend for more than 3 years already after the start of full-scale invasion. And what, Sasha, you said that about the future when this war will end, and what Ukraine will be a great partner of the European Union, of NATO. At that moment, Ukraine will be a country with the largest army in Europe, and with the only army of real battle experience of the future wars, not of the wars of the previous century. So,
and I think Ukrainian commanders would have to lead NATO, because they know what they're talking about, not all this
during the Second World War, in the Soviet army, the most gifted and successful commanders were Ukrainians. Actually, Ukrainians helped Soviet Union to achieve victory in that war. And I agree with you, Sasha.
I would like to also mention that we have to give all due to President Zelensky. The way, remember how it all started in February in Oval Office, and there were even jokes that Zelensky, before he went to Oval Office, he should have read bestseller by Monica Lewinsky, How to Behave in Oval Office. And he didn't his home job. He didn't do it. That's why.
No.
But you know, in times, their relationship evolved, and they had further meetings, and they had telephone calls, and as much as Trump became disillusioned with Putin, and he became warming up to Zelensky because Zelensky never let him down. Everything what Trump asked him, Zelensky delivered in spades. And Zelensky became for Trump now as the his man in Europe. He respects Zelensky more than all other European leaders, by the way. This is
and interestingly enough, remember when Trump said to Zelensky, "You don't have any cards." This is right, and Zelensky, no doubt, was thinking to himself, "Oh yes, I do," and I'm about to.
And after the spiderweb operation, when Russia lost,
that's the way he says, "I like these cards."
Yeah, I have some cards, but I can't tell you about them right now.
I'm keeping them face down. Okay, then we come. Then I'll show them.
And it's actually completely clear why Zelensky is not telling our allies about all the cards, considering the situations when some American officers took out and published some secret information about the state of Ukrainian army and about the preparing of Ukrainian counter offensive operation in 2023, and we cannot be pretty sure that those information we share they will not go to Russians via some useful idiots or Russian assets or etc. So such operations are better to do in top secret, like actual Israeli is doing. I'm not sure that Israeli notified United States about that operation with pagers, or about that operation in Qatar. Sasha was talking about that. They've just did it.
Yeah,
they just did it, and better to ask for apologize, than for permission by
forgiveness rather than ask permission. That's the better move. And as Winston Churchill also pointed out, or in earlier years, that in wartime the truth is so precious that it must be protected by a bodyguard of lies. In this case, the Ukrainians have chosen not necessarily lies; they are protecting it with a bodyguard of silence. They just don't say it, and then they execute it. And I think Zelensky's not saying anything when President Trump said, "You don't have any cards," and he just kept his counsel, kept his silence, and then he unleashed that surprise offensive, which took out about a third of the Russian strategic bomber force. I think President Trump was very seriously impressed by that, and so, these Ukrainians have more tricks up their sleeve. I think I better change my opinion. And so I think all of this, Zelensky has been very key in this entire war. Not only his leadership, but also his very good strategic and diplomatic moves to make sure that Ukraine has maximum support.
Also, just a moment, I want to mention something about this program, Ukraine Today, in Russian language. They showed what a new weapons and ammunitions West is supplying Ukraine. Number one is by far Germany, and their weapons are quite effective. They're first class, and that includes Leopards, it includes Gepards, it includes so many more different weapons and ammunition, and it's all already in Ukraine. It's coming to Ukraine. It's being produced, some of it in Ukraine, and others supplying, even aircrafts, F-16s. There will be hundreds. Belgium now receiving new F-35 from the US, and they're bringing all their F-16s, whatever they have, to Ukraine. They don't need it anymore.
Right.
Everything. Then the Mirage, the French. Now, the Mirage, they showed very interesting things, that they're fighting in pairs because they have perfect communications between them, and their C1 pilot can see not only his screen, but his partner's screen. So they're working in pairs, and they're very effective, and they can do many, many different missions. And finally, Sweden Gripen aircraft, which is probably is not well known as F-16s and Mirage, but they constructed this airplane to fight the army or air force, which is much more superior in numbers to the Sweden Air Force, and they design somehow this aircraft that it can fight much superior air force. So all that is coming to Ukraine. So now let me think about, Jonathan. Of course, if Ukrainian news program knows about that, so perhaps Putin and his generals, they also understand that. Yes. So what's the next step? They cannot produce anything close to European and American weapons. So shouldn't they maybe thinking about the peace? Because what's going to happen in a few months, it will be horrible result for Russia.
Well, it will be a horrible result because all of those aircraft and weapons that you have mentioned are providing Ukraine with the necessary prerequisite for launching that decisive counteroffensive that I mentioned. Potentially, and especially given what we've seen in Crimea, the destruction of Russian air defenses and other things, and potentially the sealing off, if the Ukrainians choose, the sealing off by destroying the Kerch Bridge, although, in kind of a reverse application of the Russian logic, they might want to preserve that Kerch Bridge in case they want to launch an offensive into a neighboring Russian province. So, but in any case, the Ukrainians will very shortly, before the end of this year, they will have all the necessary equipment and aircraft necessary to gain air superiority over any sector of the front they choose. And they will be able to launch a successful counteroffensive to drive the Russians out. My prediction, based on what I see, is Crimea. And that would be the crown jewel, so to speak, which would have a decisive effect on Russian perceptions. If they are driven out of Crimea and Ukraine recovers control of Crimea, that will force the Russians into that situation that you talked about. Maybe we better just declare victory and go home and cut their losses. As unpleasant a choice as that is for Russia, they have been placed in a situation that you like to call in chess zugzwang. They horse move. They have no good moves.
Apparently, on this, Ivan, maybe you're watching these programs on Russian television, Solovyov show and some other garbage.
Don't you think he had something better to do with his time?
My mental health is too weak for watching this bullshit propaganda videos.
You
can only take so much bullshit.
There are some new motives are now being produced on Solovyov show. They have some people supposedly like professionals, like army generals or some politicians or so. So now they have a new way of thinking, that the victory in a war doesn't have to be military victory. It could be a moral victory. It could be something that proves that you were right and you defended your country against possible invasion of enemy. So that also is victory. So that's something, like before you will take Kyiv in 4 days and 5 days.
I'm not sure they don't need any excuses to announce victory and go home like Jonathan was doing, because they can sell everything to their population, because they are completely zombified by that propaganda. And actually, in one thing, both Trump and Zelensky are right, that this war can be stopped in 1 day. And the only person who can stop this war in 1 day is Putin, because this war continues because of his desire to get Ukraine, entire Ukraine, to punish Ukraine. He actually receives pleasure every time he is bombing Ukraine, every time his generals report him about some mysterious battlefield victories, like capturing another ruined village somewhere between Ukraine and Russia in that gray zone. And a lot of people actually expressed his opinion about his psychotype, like he's some kind of maniac who enjoys the war and enjoys the fact that he's ruining lives of dozens of people, both in Ukraine and in Russia. We just what Sasha, you started from, that we just have to remind that one of the goals of Putin's so-called special military operation was demilitarizing Ukraine. Not letting Ukraine have any military at all, not military industry, not weapons. What we see as the result, that Ukraine is having more and more powerful military with every month, and we are waiting for Tomahawk missiles. Maybe it will be next big steps, because in the beginning of this war, a lot of our Western partners said impossible to numerous Ukrainian requests, that it's impossible to get Western artillery to Ukraine. It's impossible to get to provide Ukraine with HIMARS systems. It's impossible to provide Ukraine with F-16s, etc., etc. Now,
it's a lot easier, isn't it?
Thanks to President Trump, they are not saying it's impossible for Ukraine to get Tomahawks. They're saying it's a matter of discussion. We just want to understand how Ukraine will use it. Probably will Ukraine use Tomahawk to strike Moscow, maybe Putin residence, and it will be just interesting to watch how Tomahawk missiles will fly over the Putin residence or over the Kremlin. I will buy popcorn, get some whiskey, and we'll watch how Kremlin is burning with a great pleasure, like a lot of Ukrainians, I'm pretty sure, and the Americans, I think they will be watching burning Kremlin with a great pleasure.
Actually, Trump can assure Putin that if your Kremlin will be destroyed, we will help you to rebuild it. So don't worry that much about it.
He's good in real estate, so I think, yeah.
And they would say, we will rename the Kremlin Trump Tower East.
Yeah, that's right. And as a good showman, Trump is doing very interesting things. So he said he almost decided to provide Ukraine with Tomahawks. Then he'll say he made the final decision. Then he'll say that the first 200 Tomahawks will come to Ukraine at the 28th of November. And then he will ratchet things up. So Putin will say, "Oh well, I was joking. I mean,"
and President Trump will say, "Well, I'm not joking." This is the thing that Putin has fundamentally misunderstood about President Trump, just as Putin fundamentally misunderstood NATO, the nature of NATO. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian military. He has made so many mistakes in his perceptions and conclusions that arguably now Vladimir Putin has become as irrational in his pursuit of an illusory military victory in Ukraine as Adolf Hitler was in the closing months of World War II. Yeah, even after the unsuccessful Battle of the Bulge, even after that offensive was defeated, Adolf Hitler launched more offensives. He didn't try to sue for peace or shore up their defense. He actually tried launching more offensives, smaller in scope than the Ardennes offensive with 2 Panzer armies. But he kept on trying to launch offensives right up until, shortly before he committed suicide. So right now, Vladimir Putin is in a comparable state of irrationality. And this is why, although that is a good development for the ultimate victory of Ukraine, it is still a cause for cautious optimism. If
Adolf Hitler was thinking about the future of Germany, he would put all his forces on the eastern flank in order to slow the Soviet army and let allies to occupy Germany full instead of dividing it. I think it was the major tragedy for Germany, that division and the occupation by Soviets of the eastern part of Germany.
I experimented with a war game in my collection, looking at the closing situation of Germany in 1940, late 44-45, and I experimented with, instead of using those 2 Panzer armies to launch the Ardennes offensive, instead to throw those 2 Panzer armies and all available resources, basically keep the defenses in the west to a minimum and be prepared to retreat east, and instead throw all available offensives against the Soviets, particularly along the Baltic coast, where the German 19th Army had been cut off in the Courland Peninsula, and they had been isolated. Instead, use those Panzer armies to punch a hole along that coastline, to open up a gate, to open an opening where the 19th Army could retreat west and get out of that trap and reestablish a defense in the east. They would have been able to hold off the Soviets just long enough for the Western Allies to come through and occupy the whole of Germany. That would have prevented Soviet occupation of any portion of Germany. They would have been able to preserve German unification, and it would a more rational German leadership, other than Adolf Hitler, would have been able to preserve German unity and prevent, by the way, the rape of 2 million German women by the Russian army.
Yeah, well, maybe Germans believed, after losing so many battles to Russians, to Soviet army, that maybe American Western army is not as tough, and maybe it would be easier.
That was Hitler's estimation. He thought that the American army was the weakest link in the Allies.
Yeah,
so he was proven wrong.
Yeah. As many other things. Ladies and gentlemen, I really appreciate today's show. Thank you very much for participating. And I'm looking forward to Friday again, get together and have a good chat. And in the meantime, slava to Ukraine.
God bless America.
Героям слава.
Of course, and Canada and province of Ontario, and we'll discuss further things and hopefully good news by Friday. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.